President Joe Biden said on Thursday that Cuba is a failed state and called communism a failed system as protests play out against the Caribbean nation's repressive regime. During a news conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Biden said the United States is looking into ways to possibly reinstate access to the internet in Cuba, but indicated that the U.S. is not considering reestablishing U.S. to Cuba remittances, the practice of Americans transferring money to their Cuban relatives, over concerns that the regime would confiscate their funds. Cuba is unfortunately a failed state and repressing their citizens. There are a number of things that we would consider doing to help the people of Cuba, but it would require a different circumstance or a guarantee that they would not be taken advantage of by the government, Biden said. For example, the ability to send remittances back to Cuba. We would not do that now because the fact it is it's highly likely the regime would confiscate those remittances or big chunks of it. When asked about his views on communism, the president added, "Communism is a failed system, a universally failed system, and I don't see socialism as a very useful substitute, but that's another story." Always has to throw in those shots against Sanders, huh? Thousands of Cubans took to the streets across the island nation last weekend to protest chronic shortages of basic goods, curbs on civil liberties, and the government's handling of a worsening COVID outbreak, marking the most significant unrest in decades. Since Biden's arrival in office, Cuban policies have remained in review. So, I want to talk a little bit about why Biden's comments really annoyed me. Um, I tend to not like talking about socialism because I see it as a buzzword that is used by right-leaning people to not actually have discussion on policy. So kind of like how you'll have people say, "Oh, this person is a communist," or they believe in Leninism or some other term that is there. Because I think it'd be much more fruitful to have dialogues where people state what specific things they would like to see done by the government. So even if someone disagrees with free college or the Green New Deal or a $15 minimum wage, those are still specific policy ideas that I would have a lot more respect from people opposing, because usually they'll actually sit there and break down what about those specific positions they have an issue with, instead of, "Oh, this person is a believer in socialism, so they're going to destroy the U.S., whatever." So that's the biggest problem I have with getting caught up in these terms. Um, and I guess the other part of it is that a lot of times when you talk negatively about these different terms, it infers that the things people who support those systems or engage in those systems have done are not replicated by other systems of government. So, for example, where it's talked about how for these protests beginning, it mentions the government's handling of a worsening COVID outbreak, like being not to the appeal of Cuban citizens. There were plenty of Americans who hated the way Trump handled the virus last year, whether it was the fact he didn't wear a mask for months or that they felt he was downplaying it. And when they talk about curbs on civil liberties, there are a lot of people who believe that the U.S.'s laws have been against civilians with the spying and wiretapping and of that nature. Um, it's just really sucks when we don't sit here and actually talk about specific things that governments are doing wrong because we're concerned about calling this government a supporter of this system or of some other term that you might want to use. you know it's really frustrating. That's probably the best way to put it. And I think it starts to kind of, because I one things I like about having discussions about this stuff with people who are actually open-minded is that you can have a civilized dialogue where you just get into detail of why you support certain positions or oppose other ones. And you can't have that when everybody's shouting, "This person's a communist, this person's a socialist, this person wants to destroy our capitalist society." And of course, when I look at Sweden and Denmark and I see, Biden saying that socialism doesn't work, I'm really amused. But they never tend to bring up those kind of countries when they want to do their, anti-socialism stance. Uh, and when he says, the chronic short, in the article they mentioned a chronic shortage of basic goods, like there aren't people in America that are starving. God, I swear. We always position ourselves as being, and it doesn't mean we're as, I'm trying to say we're as bad as Cuba, but I just think when you sit there and you start talking about which systems of government are successes, and you say, oh, this one definitely doesn't work and ours works, you're being really short-sighted, because there's a lot of ways in which you can criticize the democracy of the US. Talk about having elections on a weekday in which most people have to go to work. That purposely makes it harder for them to vote in elections. I mean, it's really insane to me that, he wants to sit here and talk about, oh, this system doesn't work. Like, well, there's a lot of ways in which capitalism hasn't worked. But you won't see anybody talking about abandoning that. So it's annoying. I wish that people would specifically say what they don't like about these systems instead of just, this one is bad because it's this term. I don't, because again, it doesn't address any particular problems they have with the policies enacted by that particular country's head of state.